Okay, so in the election of 1908, you're going to see a new progressive president getting into office. Theodore Roosevelt had already served 2 terms, and so you're going to eventually see the election of William Howard Taft. Okay, so William Howard Taft is going to be elected into office. He's also going to play a role in the antitrust movement, right? Attacking these large trusts, these organizations which are reducing economic competition because they're basically monopolies. And Taft is going to play a role in the breakup of the Standard Oil Trust. Okay, remember Standard Oil? We talked about them. Vertical integration. Remember, they basically own all of the companies that are related to their industry. Well, Standard Oil is going to be ordered by the Supreme Court to break up into different companies, right? Rival companies, separate companies, can't be owned by the same person, right? John D. Rockefeller. And so Taft plays a role in this. He is, pushing the Supreme Court to rule in favor of breaking up Standard Oil. So now, this antitrust movement, this is all because of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which we've talked about before. Now the Sherman Antitrust Act is coming into effect, and it's actually being used to break up trusts, whereas before it was not. And so, yeah, Standard Oil breaks up. Some other big things that happened during Taft's administration, you have the passing of the 16th and 17th Amendment, right, which will go through Congress and get ratified by the states. First, we'll talk about the 16th Amendment. This is where we get the graduated income tax, okay? Remember the populists? We talked about the populists, that political ideology. They wanted a graduated income tax. And so, yes, this is going to become law now. Now we're paying income taxes, and yes, they're graduated, meaning that if you make more money, you pay more taxes. If you make less money, you pay less taxes, right? What's the point? Who wants this? Why do people want to pay taxes, on their income? Well, at the time, the farmers wanted this. Okay, and remember, there's still a considerable part of the population that are farmers, right? We used to be a nation of farmers, but you have farmers in the West, farmers in the South, who want income tax because income tax is basically a source of revenue for the government. That's where the government's going to get its money now. Because before, you know what the big source of revenue was for the government? Import taxes, tariffs. Okay, that's why you have government always supporting a very high tariff where everything that's being imported is going to have a high price, right? And this is also made prices high for products that were produced domestically as well. All right, and so you have people in the South, people in the West are like, why am I having to pay these high prices for these imported goods, and it's making local goods, high price as well? Why do I have to pay these prices? That doesn't support my state. That supports, the big industries, the factories in the East and in the mid-Northwest. So yes, the income tax is going to give government a separate avenue for bringing in money. Then you have the 17th Amendment also being put into the Constitution during Taft's administration, and this is calling for the direct election of U.S. senators. Okay, direct democracy. Every state gets 2 senators, and before, the senators were appointed, not elected, but appointed by the state legislature. But now the voters can choose who is going to go into office and serve those 6-year senator terms. Now, President Taft is only going to serve 1 term, okay? He does run for re-election, but he doesn't win. And this is in the election of 1912. So who's running against Taft in this election? Well, you got Woodrow Wilson, who's a Democrat. You got Eugene Debs representing the Socialist Party, right? Talked about him a little bit earlier. And then someone that's a little familiar, Theodore Roosevelt. He's running for a 3rd term. We'll talk about that in just a second. But Roosevelt is now running for a different political party. So he's the candidate of a different political party, the Progressive Party. Okay, yeah, progressives got their own political party, and Roosevelt is their candidate for president in 1912. And so what do they stand for? What are the progressives calling for? What's their platform in this election? Well, they're calling for workers' rights, definitely, protection for the workers, 8-hour workday, unemployment insurance, right? So if you're not employed, you get some money from the government. They're calling for medical care And this is from the Progressive Party, not the Socialist Party, right? Nowadays, when you talk about universal medical care, people are saying, oh, that's socialism, that's socialism. But this is a progressive issue. So universal medical care, in a sense, old age insurance, later on that's going to become a reality, Social Security, but it's not there yet. We don't have Social Security at this point. Women's right to vote, women's suffrage is another issue that the progressives support. And also, of course, government regulation of business. We talked about the antitrust movement. So Roosevelt, he's running for his third term. Is he going to get it? No. Roosevelt's not going to get elected to office. Instead, it's going to be Woodrow Wilson. So a little bit about Woodrow Wilson's first term. We'll talk about him more next time. But under Wilson's administration, you have some key legislation being passed. The Federal Reserve System was passed in 1913. And so that's pretty big. We still have the Federal Reserve today. The Federal Reserve is in charge of issuing currency, how much currency is going to be in circulation. Also, the Federal Reserve helps out local banks if they're struggling. You also have the Federal Reserve having the power to influence interest rates. Okay, yes, the Federal Reserve, if it raises its interest rates, then other banks are going to follow suit if they're going to raise their interest rates as well. Okay. So interest rates goes up. That's, if we need economic growth, if we need to fight inflation, that's when you see interest rates going up. You also have the Federal Trade Commission being created under Woodrow Wilson's first term, right? Congress is passing this. The Federal Trade Commission, this is a federal agency. And this is definitely, moving more in a progressive direction because the Federal Trade Commission has the ability to investigate companies. And yes, this is moving more in a progressive direction because the Federal Trade Commission is, in a sense, regulating business, okay? And, that's on the progressive platform, right? So yeah, the Federal Trade Commission has the ability to investigate companies, see if they're truly using fair practices, to see if they're not, fixing prices. Remember, we talked about how pools, different companies who work together in different regions to set the same prices. You work in your region, I work in my region, but we'll basically charge the same price, we'll all profit. That's not going to happen with the Federal Trade Commission investigating you. Monopolies, right? So again, this is part of that antitrust movement, the establishment of the Federal Trade Commission. And then also we have the Warehouse Act. Got to bring that up because we've talked about the farmers and how they were calling for the sub-treasury plan. Remember the sub-treasury plan, right? Where you had farmers calling for that. They wanted to get loans from the government and not from the big banks because they were falling in debt and losing their farms. So the Warehouse Act is going to allow that to happen. Government is going to start giving out loans to farmers, and farmers got to put up some collateral. You know what the collateral is? Their crops, right? And they put their crops into government licensed warehouses, and once they put their crops there, that's the collateral, and then they can get loans from the government, right? So these are some of the changes that took place under the first term of Woodrow Wilson. We'll talk about him more when we get to World War I.